Hey everyone, welcome back to Easy English Stories, the place where powerful life lessons come alive through simple, meaningful stories. If you enjoy real stories about growth, success, failure, and life-changing moments, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Every story here is meant to inspire you and help you see life from a new perspective. Now let me tell you a story about a young man who thought life would always be easy, until one day everything changed. When I was young, I thought life was simple, almost ridiculously simple. My father had money, plenty of it, and that was enough for me. I never worried about tomorrow, never thought about plans or responsibilities. School was just a place to pass the time. I didn't study seriously, didn't think about work, and never once imagined a life where I'd have to earn anything on my own. Every desire I had, every fleeting whim, my father would fulfill it. A new pair of shoes? Bought. The latest phone? Delivered. Fancy trips or gifts? Always ready, no questions asked. I didn't think of the effort behind it. I didn't think about the long hours my father spent, the meetings, the stress. All I saw was the outcome. My life full of comfort and ease. My friends, though, were different. They would constantly talk about the future, about saving money, about building a career. I would just laugh at them. Why plan? I thought. Why work hard when life already gives me everything I could want? Mornings were my favorite. I would wake up late, the sun already high in the sky. Breakfast was often delivered to my bed. Pancakes, fresh juice, sometimes even fancy fruits I couldn't have named. Then I'd grab my phone, scroll endlessly, or turn on the TV for hours. Sometimes I'd head out to meet my friends. We'd eat at the best restaurants, wear the trendiest clothes, drive fast cars, and laugh without a care in the world. Life felt like a dream. I genuinely believed it would always stay like this. I didn't consider money or the need to work. I only lived in the moment. Travel, shopping, entertainment, all were effortless. One day my father called me into his study. I walked in expecting the usual friendly smile, maybe a small joke. But he looked serious, more serious than I had ever seen him before. "Sit down," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Yes, father." But his expression didn't change. He wasn't joking. He wasn't even mildly cheerful. For the first time, I felt a flutter of unease. My father had always been kind, never said no to me. Yet here he was, stern, almost unapproachable. Taking a deep breath, he looked me straight in the eyes. "You're not a child anymore," he said slowly. "It's time you start thinking about your future." I laughed, brushing it off. "Father, I have everything I need," I said confidently, still not understanding the weight of his words. He shook his head. "No, my son, you have everything because I work hard. But life isn't always easy. One day things might change, and you need to be ready for that." I didn't comprehend. I thought he was overreacting. "Don't worry, father. Nothing will change," I said with a smile. He didn't smile back. Instead, he stared at me silently for a long moment, then finally said, "We'll see." I didn't know what he meant. Thinking he was just in a serious mood, I left the room and went out with my friends. We laughed, spent money, lived freely. I had no idea that my life, as I knew it, was about to change forever. The next morning, I woke up late, stretched lazily, and grabbed my phone. Messages from friends flooded in. They wanted to hang out. I smiled, got dressed in my best outfit, sprayed expensive cologne, and headed downstairs, expecting the usual routine. But my father was already there, standing silently, arms crossed, his expression serious. "Sit down," he said. I sighed, confused. "Father, I have plans today," I mumbled. He ignored me, looking straight into my eyes. "You're not a boy anymore," he repeated. "It's time you learn about life." I rolled my eyes. "Father, I already know about life," I said half-heartedly. He shook his head. "No, you don't, not really." Then almost mysteriously he said, "Come with me." I followed him outside, wondering where we were going. He got into his car and I sat beside him, curiosity mixing with irritation. The city looked different that morning. The streets I had walked past 1,000 times suddenly seemed alive, with stories I had ignored. People walking fast, heads down, carrying bags, pushing carts. Workers cleaning streets before sunrise. Vendors shouting, selling food by the roadside. Old women selling fruits, sewing clothes in small shops. We stopped at a fruit seller. My father pointed at him. "Look at him," he said. "He wakes up at dawn, works all day without rest, without complaining. He does it to feed his family." Then he showed me an elderly woman inside a small shop, sewing clothes meticulously. "She's been doing this for 40 years, my father said. "She doesn't have much, but she works hard every single day." I stared at them, feeling something I had never felt before. Smallness, awe, confusion. For the first time, I realized life wasn't the easy playground I had imagined. We returned to the car silently. My mind was buzzing. Faces, actions, struggles, images I had never noticed before filled my head. I understood nothing yet, but I felt a shift inside me. Something had changed. The next morning, I woke up early. For the first time in years, the sun caught me awake. Not my alarm or the soft comfort of a warm bed. My body protested. Stiff shoulders, aching back, and a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. But today there was no choice. Today I was going to work. My father was already in the kitchen, waiting with a small brown lunch bag. He handed it to me silently. "Your lunch," he said simply. I looked at him, puzzled. "Lunch? Can't I just eat at a restaurant like before?" He shook his head. "Workers bring their own lunch. And today you are a worker." I swallowed hard. The words hit differently than I expected. Today I wasn't the spoiled kid who got whatever he wanted. Today I was someone else entirely. We drove to his office in silence. I tried to guess where he would take me, but he said nothing. I watched the city blur past, noticing things I had ignored before. Streets still damp from morning mist. A man dragging heavy crates across the sidewalk. Women balancing baskets on their heads. People moved with purpose, exhaustion, determination. Life I had never noticed until now. When we arrived at the office, my father didn't take me to his private office. Instead, he led me to a small, crowded room filled with desks, phones ringing constantly. People typing furiously at computers, shuffling papers, talking quickly into headsets. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and concentration. "This," my father said, "is where the real work happens." He introduced me to a man wearing glasses, sharp and serious, whose expression suggested he had no patience for nonsense. "This is Mr. William," my father said. "You will work under him." Then he turned and left. I was left staring at Mr. William, who gave me a sharp nod. "Come with me," he said. He led me to a small desk in the corner, a tiny workspace surrounded by taller, more experienced employees. On my desk, a huge stack of papers waited, pages filled with numbers, charts, calculations, all demanding attention. "Your job," Mr. Williams said, "is to check these numbers. Look for mistakes, mark them, and do it fast." I blinked. Fast? There were hundreds of pages. How could anyone do this fast? I sat down and picked up the first sheet. At first it seemed manageable, but as I scanned through, my eyes began to blur. Every number looked the same. Every column seemed to stretch endlessly. My head throbbed. My back ached from sitting upright, my hands cramping from holding the pen. I glanced around. Everyone else was focused, moving efficiently without complaints. The energy in the room was intense, relentless. There was no laughter, no chatting, no fun distractions, just work. By lunchtime, I was completely exhausted. My lunch bag contained a simple sandwich and an apple. No fancy drinks, no treats. I ate quietly, observing the other workers. They ate fast, almost mechanically, and returned immediately to their tasks. I missed my old life, the freedom, the ease, the laughter. But even as I sat there, something stirred inside me. Respect. For the first time, I truly respected these people. For the first time, I felt what it meant to earn something with your own effort. The afternoon was even harder. Mr. William came to my desk, peered at my work and frowned. "Redo this," he said. "Mistakes here." I wanted to argue, to complain, to tell him I wasn't used to this. But I didn't. I simply nodded, took a deep breath, and started again. The hours crawled. My fingers ached from writing. My back screamed from sitting. My eyes burned from staring at endless columns of numbers. And yet I kept going. When the day finally ended, I was drained. Every muscle in my body begged me to stop. But there was something different now. A shift. A small, unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. I had done it. I had survived the first day. Outside the office, my father waited. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't need to. I looked at him, exhausted but different, and for the first time in my life, I smiled. Not because life was easy, not because I was spoiled, but because I had earned it. The next day, the routine repeated. I woke up sore. My hands and back still ached. My mind felt foggy from the previous day's strain. I wanted to stay in bed to escape, but I couldn't. Work awaited. At the office, Mr. William was already there. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. "You were slow yesterday," he said. "Today, work faster." I didn't reply. I simply sat down, opened my papers and started. The numbers stared at me, relentless, unforgiving. My mind wanted to rebel, my body wanted to give up, but I pushed through. Slowly, hour by hour, I started to improve. Mistakes decreased. My speed increased. At lunch, I sat with other workers for the first time. They spoke about their families, their struggles, small victories, and frustrations. I listened, learning more about life in those short minutes than I ever had in my carefree years. I began to understand the hidden world of effort, persistence, and human endurance. The afternoon was brutal. Mr. William assigned me even more papers, testing my patience and endurance. I wanted to complain, to flee, but I didn't. I focused. I worked. The hours passed, and slowly I began to feel a strange satisfaction. By the end of the day, Mr. William walked over. He didn't smile, but he said, "Not bad. Just 2 words. Simple words. Yet they meant more than any gift I had ever received." As I left the office, my father was waiting again. He looked tired, but proud. I nodded to him. He gave a faint smile. That faint smile felt heavier, richer than any luxury I had once taken for granted. For the first time, I began to understand that life wasn't just about comfort. It was about effort, responsibility, and learning to stand on your own. The days after my first week at the office started to blend together. Each morning, the alarm felt heavier, the ache in my back more pronounced, and my hands a little stiffer than the day before. Yet each day I showed up. At first, the routine felt unbearable. I would drag myself out of bed, dress quickly, and silently eat my simple breakfast before heading to the office. Every morning, I passed the same streets I had ignored for years, but now they felt alive with purpose. Vendors shouting for customers, children running to school, men and women carrying heavy loads, life moving forward even before I had my first sip of coffee. At the office, Mr. William was relentless. "You were slow yesterday," he said one morning, squinting at my papers. "Today I expect more." I didn't argue. I nodded and dove into the numbers. The first hour was torturous. My eyes were already tired, my back screamed, and my brain ached from concentration. Mistakes seemed to multiply the harder I tried. But slowly I started noticing patterns. Numbers that looked the same began to make sense. Charts that were confusing yesterday now told stories of profit, loss, and efficiency. By lunchtime, I was exhausted. The sandwich in my lunch bag tasted different now. Not bad, not simple, but grounding. I watched other workers eat quickly, returning immediately to their desks. There was no chatter, no idle conversation, no distraction. Only work, constant and unyielding. And yet, as I sat among them, something shifted. I no longer felt like an outsider. Listening to their conversations, I realized they carried lives, responsibilities, families, and challenges I had never considered. They weren't just workers. They were humans, hustling day after day to survive and support those they loved. I began to understand a truth I had never grasped in my carefree life. Effort was respect. Dedication earned admiration. Sweat mattered more than money. The afternoons were even more challenging. Mr. William would pace behind me, checking each page, each figure, each calculation. "Redo this section," he would say, pointing to mistakes I hadn't noticed. "Faster, be precise." At first I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, "I'm trying, it's hard enough." But I didn't. I swallowed my pride and focused. Slowly I began to improve. Mistakes decreased. My speed increased. Week by week my confidence grew, but so did my awareness. I started noticing the subtleties of the office, the whispered strategies in corners, the teamwork that made big projects succeed, the patience required to handle clients' complaints. The office became more than a place of work. It became a classroom for life. Evenings were tough. My body ached like never before. Yet each night I reflected on what I had learned. I saw my father in a new light. He wasn't simply wealthy. He was disciplined, strategic, and patient. He had built an empire with his own hands, sweat, and intellect. I began to realize that every dollar I had ever spent was tied to the effort, the sacrifice, the late nights, and the responsibilities my father had endured. One evening, after several months of this routine, my father called me into his office. I walked in, nervous but eager, wondering what lesson he would impart next. "You've changed," he said simply, studying my face. "At first you were lazy, indifferent. You didn't care about work or responsibility. But now," he paused, "you understand." I nodded silently. Words failed me. He was right. I had changed. My mind, my perspective, even my pride had shifted. I no longer saw work as punishment. I saw it as growth. I no longer feared responsibility. I craved it. Then, unexpectedly, he handed me a small key. "This," he said, "is your office." I stared at the key, astonished. My office? A tiny room, modest, but it was mine. It wasn't a gift, and it wasn't a reward. It was a symbol, trust, responsibility, and a challenge. Holding that key, I realized that all the easy mornings, the spoiled indulgences, and the carefree days had only prepared me for this moment. A chance to grow, to learn, and to earn my place in the world. The next day, I moved to my new office. It was simple. A desk, a chair, and my own space among other workers. I felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. I was no longer the lazy boy who had woken up late every morning. I was someone expected to think, act, and contribute. At first, mistakes happened. I dropped files, miscalculated figures, misread instructions, but I didn't give up. Each mistake taught me something new: patience, attention to detail, resilience. Slowly, I began to take control. Tasks that had once seemed impossible were now manageable. Challenges became opportunities to prove myself. And then something extraordinary happened. Mr. William, the man who had never smiled, passed by my desk one afternoon and muttered, "Good job." Just 2 words. Simple, almost casual. Yet I felt as if I had won a trophy. It was the first time I realized the value of genuine recognition earned through effort. Not money, not gifts, not privileges, real earned acknowledgement. I started paying attention to the rhythm of work, the steady hum of computers, The clatter of keyboards, the soft murmurs of colleagues exchanging information. I began to understand teamwork, communication, and the subtle art of leadership. Every day I became less of the spoiled boy and more of a student of life. Every number I checked, every report I submitted, every task I completed became a step toward understanding the world that had always existed beyond my comfort zone. Slowly, I started seeing the city differently again. Streets weren't just roads. Vendors weren't just obstacles. Workers weren't just faceless people. They were humans who struggled, dreamed, and endured, just like me, just like my father had endured for me. And with each passing day, I began to realize that the easy life I had once taken for granted wasn't real life at all. Real life was this: messy, challenging, exhausting, and profoundly meaningful. Weeks turned into months, each day blurred slightly into the next. But with every passing day, I noticed subtle changes in myself. My hands grew stronger from handling papers. My back became sturdier from hours of sitting upright, and my mind began to sharpen, noticing patterns and inconsistencies I had once ignored. The office that had once seemed overwhelming became a place of learning. I started to understand the flow of work, how decisions were made, how problems were solved, and how each employee, no matter how small their role seemed, contributed to a bigger picture. Mr. William was still strict. His gaze was sharp and his words were brief. "You're getting better," he said one morning, "but don't stop improving." Those few words again felt more valuable than any toy, any luxury, any gadget I had ever bought. They were proof that effort mattered, that growth mattered. I began to pay attention to my father's routine as well. I watched him arrive early, check reports, make calls, and solve problems that seemed impossible. He dealt with angry clients, budget crises, employee conflicts, and endless decisions, all without complaint. I realized the life I had once seen as easy had been built upon relentless hard work and sacrifice. One afternoon I stayed behind in the office long after everyone had left. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the desks. I was alone, reviewing the day's reports, correcting small mistakes I had missed earlier. The silence was different now, not empty but comforting. I felt productive. I felt capable. By this time, the initial fear and discomfort had transformed into determination. I no longer dreaded the morning alarm. I anticipated the day, eager to take on challenges, to learn, to grow. Even small victories felt monumental. Finishing a large stack of papers without mistakes, completing a complicated calculation correctly, getting Mr. Williams' nod of approval. Each success, no matter how minor, became a fuel for confidence I had never experienced. I started interacting with the other workers more, learning their stories. There was Maria, who had worked at the company for over a decade, juggling work and 2 kids at home. There was James, a quiet man who worked tirelessly to save money for his family's future. They shared advice, small tips, and occasional laughs. I began to see them as mentors, teaching me lessons about patience, perseverance, and dedication. Months passed, and my father noticed the change. One evening he called me into his office again. I walked in, nervous, wondering what new lesson awaited me. "You've grown," he said, studying me carefully, "not just in skill, but in understanding. You've learned the value of work, of responsibility, and of patience." I nodded silently, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He was right. I had changed. My perspective, my attitude, even my self-respect had transformed. Then he handed me something I hadn't expected, a small key. "This is your office," he said. My heart skipped a beat. My own office? A space to call mine. Not a luxury, not a reward, but trust, responsibility, recognition of my growth. Moving into that office was a turning point. I had my own desk, my own chair, my own tasks. I was no longer just a worker following instructions. I was a learner, a thinker, someone starting to take ownership of my responsibilities. At first, mistakes still happened. I misfiled papers, misread data, and sometimes forgot minor tasks. But each mistake taught me something new. Each challenge became an opportunity to improve, to adapt, to grow stronger. Gradually, I began to manage larger tasks. I started helping others when they were overwhelmed. I began to notice inefficiencies and offer solutions. My father's teachings had become internalized. The principles of hard work, diligence, and foresight were no longer lessons. They were part of who I had become. One late evening, after months of learning and effort, Mr. William walked by my desk. He paused, looked at my work, and finally, for the first time, gave a full nod. "Good job," he said with a faint but unmistakable smile. Those two words felt heavier, deeper, and more satisfying than anything I had ever owned. It wasn't just praise, it was recognition, proof that I had earned respect, skill, and trust. I left the office that evening and saw my father waiting outside. He didn't speak, he just smiled. But that smile carried weight. It wasn't given lightly. It wasn't easy to earn. And for the first time in my life, I felt proud, not because I had money or comfort, but because I had earned a place in the world through effort and determination. The city looked different now. I noticed everything: the workers cleaning streets at dawn, the vendors shouting their prices, the mothers carrying children while hustling through crowds. Life wasn't easy for anyone, but it was purposeful. And now I was part of it, not as a spectator, but as a participant. Every day, every challenge, every small success became a lesson. My old life of luxury and ease had taught me nothing about discipline, perseverance, or respect. Now every hour I spent working, every calculation I checked, every interaction I had, all of it was shaping me into someone stronger, more aware, and more responsible. I was no longer just my father's son. I was becoming someone capable of facing life on my own terms. And for the first time, I understood that the true easy life wasn't comfort or privilege. It was the ability to work, grow, and create a future with your own hands. As the months passed, my role in the office continued to grow. What had once felt overwhelming and impossible now began to feel like a challenge I could handle. I no longer feared mistakes as I once had. Instead, I saw them as lessons, stepping stones toward improvement. My mornings were still early, my body still complained, but my mind had sharpened. I could now read reports, analyze data, and anticipate problems before they became major issues. My confidence was growing, slowly but steadily, and with it came a deep sense of responsibility. One afternoon, Mr. William approached me, holding a report I had prepared. He studied it, frowning briefly before nodding slowly. "Much better," he said. "You're learning." Those words, though simple, filled me with pride. I realized that growth was not about applause or rewards. It was about earning recognition through effort, persistence, and resilience. At the same time, I began noticing subtle changes in my father. He no longer simply gave instructions or monitored work from a distance. He started involving me in decisions, asking my opinion on small matters, and explaining the reasoning behind larger ones. One evening, he called me into his office. The sun had set, casting a warm golden glow over the room. "You've changed," he said, studying me carefully. "You've gone from a boy who cared only about comfort to a young man who understands work, responsibility, and life itself." I nodded silently, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He continued, handing me another key, smaller than the first, but heavier in significance. "This is your office," he said. "It's time you take on more responsibility. You've worked hard, and now it's time to lead." My heart pounded. Lead? The thought was intimidating yet exciting. I realized that leadership was not about power or status. It was about guiding others, making tough decisions, and carrying responsibility with integrity. The next day, I moved into my new office. It was modest but fully mine. I had my own desk, my own files, and my own tasks. The employees I had once worked beside now looked at me with curiosity and respect. Some of them even asked for advice. I felt a weight on my shoulders, but I also felt alive in a way I never had before. As I settled into this new role, I realized that my growth was no longer just about completing tasks. It was about understanding people, motivating them, and learning to solve problems efficiently. I began mentoring new workers, teaching them the lessons I had learned, while still being guided by Mr. William and my father. The city outside no longer seemed distant or meaningless. I walked the streets with a new awareness, recognizing the struggles and triumphs of every individual I passed. I understood now that every worker, every business owner, every person hustling through life contributed to the invisible rhythm that kept the world moving. Even my relationship with my father deepened. He no longer saw me as just his son. He saw me as a partner, someone capable of making decisions, solving problems, and carrying a portion of the burden. And with that recognition came a new kind of pride, not the pride of privilege, but the pride of earned respect. One day, after completing a particularly challenging project, I stayed late to review reports. Mr. William walked by and said, "Something I had never expected. Excellent work today. You're ready for more responsibility." I looked up at him, surprised. For the first time, his praise carried warmth and genuine acknowledgement. I felt a sense of accomplishment that far surpassed any luxury I had ever owned or gift I had ever received. It was a pride rooted in effort, growth, and earned trust. As I walked home that evening, I reflected on the journey from the boy who had never worked a day in his life to the young man who was learning to lead. I realized that life was never meant to be easy. Real fulfillment, respect, and success came from effort, struggle, and perseverance. My father had taught me that lesson, not with lectures or admonitions, but through experience, through placing me in situations where I had to grow, adapt, and rise to challenges. And now I was ready. Ready not just to earn money or survive life, but to build, to lead, and to contribute meaningfully to the world around me. Months had passed since I first walked into that small office, timid, unsure, and completely unprepared for the world outside my comfort zone. Back then, I had thought life was a simple collection of pleasures, money, luxury, and freedom. But now, sitting in my modest office, I realized that life was never simple. Life was effort, dedication, struggle, and growth. Each morning, I woke early, not out of obligation, but out of purpose. The ache in my back and the stiffness in my hands had become familiar companions, reminders that real work leaves marks on both body and mind. I walked to the office with awareness, noticing every detail of the city I had once ignored. The baker setting up his stall, the janitor cleaning the sidewalks, the street vendors preparing for the morning crowd. Life moved forward because of effort, not luck. At the office, I was no longer just a worker. I was a leader in training, guiding new employees, helping them navigate challenges, and sharing the lessons I had learned through my own mistakes. Mr. William, once strict and unyielding, now gave me subtle nods of approval. His respect was quiet but meaningful, and it felt more rewarding than any praise or gift I had received in my childhood. My father, too, noticed the transformation. One evening, after a particularly long day, he called me into his office. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the sunset, casting shadows across the shelves of books and reports he had meticulously maintained over the years. "You've grown," he said, his voice calm but filled with pride. Not just in skill, but in understanding. You understand effort. You understand responsibility. And most importantly, you understand life. I looked at him, words failing me. How could I explain the gratitude, the awe, and the deep respect I now felt for this man who had given me everything and, at the same time, forced me to earn it? He handed me another key, slightly larger this time. "This is your office," he said. "It's yours now. You've proven yourself. You are ready for the next step." I held the key carefully. It was small, unassuming, yet heavy with significance. It wasn't just metal. It was trust, responsibility, and opportunity. A symbol of my journey, from a careless boy to a young man who had learned the true value of life. Sitting in that office for the first time, alone yet fully aware of the weight of responsibility, I reflected on everything I had learned. I remembered the fruit seller, the woman's sewing clothes, the long hours spent correcting mistakes, the late nights staying behind in silence, and the gradual but undeniable growth that had reshaped me. I realized that my father had never just given me a lesson about money. He had given me a lesson about life, about respect, perseverance, patience, and integrity. He had shown me that the easy life I had once taken for granted was only possible because of effort, hard work, and responsibility. Looking back, I laughed quietly at my younger self. How naive I had been, thinking that comfort and privilege were everything. Now I knew the truth. Real value comes from struggle, from learning, from contributing, and from earning respect through your own hands. From that day forward, I approached each morning with purpose. Every report, every decision, every interaction was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to lead. I was no longer just a son living under the shadow of my father's wealth. I had become a young man capable of shaping his own life, earning respect and creating opportunities not just for myself, but for others around me. And so, my journey continued, not as a story of privilege or ease, but as a story of growth, effort, and transformation. The boy who once thought life was simple had learned that life was, in fact, a complex, beautiful, and rewarding challenge, one that I was now ready to face every single day. Thank you for joining me on this journey. This story, shared on Easy English Stories, is a reminder that life isn't about luxury or comfort. It's about effort, growth, and perseverance. If you enjoyed this story and want more lessons, experiences, and journeys told in simple, natural English, don't forget to subscribe to Easy English Stories. Every story here is designed to inspire, teach, and remind us of the true value of life. Remember, the easiest life isn't the one where everything is given. It's the one where you learn, grow, and earn your own way.